Hey, welcome to Holly's podcast. I'm guest hosting for her today because today is a information dump of her recent trip to Africa, which is just absolutely fascinating. Just a number of things that have come out. Holly, first of all, congratulations on going over there and having a look-see around that part of the world right now. So many things that just don't make it to the radar.
Yeah, really. I mean, the situation specifically, I was focusing on Darfur, which is a region of Sudan, and it is the worst humanitarian crisis in the world right now. And most people would not know that because it barely makes a blip in the news radar. And what is happening there is just beyond kind of comprehension. And although, yeah, I'm one very, very small voice in a large pool of noise, but I still felt very compelled, and I have known many Darfurians for a long time, and many of us are sort of vaguely familiar with the genocide that happened 20 years ago. But very few people understand that the violence really flared up again in April of 2023, and it's really just yes, not only just one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world, but just one of the most brutal, hard to wrap my head around, evil conflicts that I think I have ever encountered.
Yeah. Well, let's start out. So, um, how long were you there? And was it just one country that you visited, or did you visit others?
So I was there about 2 weeks, and it was primarily focused in that Chad Sudan border region where many of the refugees have sort of fled. So Al Janina, which is one of the big cities in Darfur, is just maybe sort of 10 miles away, very close. And that's really where the root of a lot of the fighting has been happening there, and where a lot of the African tribes and the Masalit tribe in particular have really been yeah, victims of what appears to be, the beginnings of another genocide.
Yeah, well, yeah, that was kind of my fear. And it's kind of rough country right now, isn't it? In terms of just the danger. I think there was another news crew that got
Yeah.
detained somewhat either right before you got there or at the
Yeah,
same
that
time
was
you
that
were
was a couple of
there.
weeks before that was CNN. That was Clarissa and her team. I don't know the full story there, but it's certainly the militias, many of them, most of them, I'm assuming belonging to the RSF, what used to be called the Janjaweed, um, terribly brutal people. So very, yeah, very grateful that nothing bad happened to them because, yeah, these are some of the most evil human beings on the planet.
Yeah, well, yeah. So you, Holly being Holly, of course, it looks like, and your gift really for going and finding the human side of what goes on as these evil people go about doing their thing. Wound up with a lot of refugees and displaced people yet again. What did you find in terms of their first their condition and then second their resiliency?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the conditions are absolutely brutal, and conditions at the camp are so bad that many people are going home to where many people don't have a home because almost everyone you speak to, their home was burned down by the militias. But people are going home because there is absolutely no prospects for them to be able to do any work. I mean, you have people that were physicians in their hometown that are begging to chop wood in the street. So it's hard to fathom, a lot of these people, they had nice lives not very long ago, and now they're really in very, very dilapidated conditions. If you can imagine, There are, at least a dozen sort of camps along the border, of tens of thousands of people. Where we were it was Malek camp, and that had about 75,000 people. And mind you, this is a tiny village, a village called Adre, which, before all the refugees came in, maybe had a couple of thousand people living there. So you can imagine, um, the sort of the lack of resources and the transformation and the challenges both for local people as well as the refugees. But you're really looking at kind of the worst of the worst conditions. For example, I mean, I was there with a great NGO called Sudan Sunrise, and we just slept on a mattress, with a mosquito net, which took me a very several nights to discover that my mosquito net had a big hole in it under the mattress. So I was getting bitten like crazy. So it wasn't much sleep happening. Um, so there was no electricity, there's no running water. You shower with a bucket on your head. You go to the toilet in a hole in the ground. Um, and that's, you're lucky to get, I think we, had one, maybe sometimes two meals a day, if that. And that we were very grateful for whatever the locals could cook us. And you notice that they put whatever the ingredients they have, they'll try to use. So there might be pasta and you're eating it and you're like, oh gosh, this tastes kind of sweet. And then, someone told me, well, they put sugar in it. So it's just whatever ingredients that they can sort of throw together is what you'll get. You might, like a lot of the kids, for breakfast, they might just have like a powdered soup that the UN provides that has a little bit of nutrients in it. And that's, something that they're very grateful for. But there really is a huge lack of food, because there is no refrigeration either. There's no electricity. In order for us just to kind of charge our phones so I could film and things, we'd have to go to a local hospital clinic in the morning and they would turn the generator on. And I would just try to charge some battery packs so that it would last at least until sort of the next day. So it's kind of this simple life that's also a very hard life. And the weather, it's extremely hot. And luckily, it is out of rain season, but now you're in sand season. So our vehicle got stuck so many times because there's no paved roads. You're basically just going on sand, and you're making a decision as you're driving. And we did this awful drive from N'Djamena, which is the capital of Chad, all the way to Adre, which worked out to be about 40 hours. And again, non-paved roads. Not in a four-wheel drive, so that was a mess. But it's just a very simple yet very difficult life. And then the heat does get extremely intense. So there's limits to how much you can be out and how much that you can be working. Um, and malaria obviously runs rampant. So everyone you speak to has a little needle in their arm, because they're all going through malaria treatment, including there was a lovely young boy, Al Mutada, who I hired as a translator, and he had malaria at the time we were trying to work. So it's just these constant things that everybody is trying to navigate, to battle, whether that's food, whether that's I mean, as I said, um, there's no sanitation. It's very hard to get water. People, will go to the well if they can. I brought bottled water, but not everybody has that luxury. And it's extremely difficult life, little things that we take for granted. There is a great little medical clinic there run by the For You Initiative, but it's a small clinic that's trying to service many, many, many people. And that's very difficult. They don't have the medicines sort of coming in. There's a lot of hold up with that. It solely relies on donations to kind of keep it going. And so the conditions are just it's just nothing, and um, it's hard to wrap your head around how people survive. And many of these women, Sudanese people have very large families. Typically, a husband will often take four wives, and they may even divorce wives, so they've got more than that. Having children, and that scene is very much a source of pride. Even if you don't necessarily have the financial means, it's still very much this source of pride to have as many children as possible. So you have women, each that may have, eight kids and be one of four in a family. And often many times their husband was killed in the fighting because mass elite men in particular were very much targeted. So you've got women who are now widowed and have these big families and zero way of making income. Um, and it's just it seems like an impossible feat. And then of course many women that are pregnant, many young babies. I was grateful to visit a local clinic in the town, which is where the women typically go to give birth, and it had a nice little room, and the OB there was really wonderful. But even the resources there too, are extremely limited. So um, it's just an incredibly hard situation sort of all around, very, very hard living conditions. And then with that, you think about the trauma that every single one of these people has been through in the last 18 months. And that just adds a whole other level of of pain and complexity.
Yeah. Well, so how big did that village swell in terms of the number of people that were there from the 2000 that would normally be members of the village?
As I said, the camp that we were at in Adre, which is one of several camps, it's not the only one. It was 75,000 people, and it's one of
Holy
several.
cow.
Yeah. So you're
Yeah.
looking at a hard to fathom
That's a
situation.
city.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
without the resources for this, you've just got people living in these sort of straw huts and things. Oftentimes, many people don't even have a mosquito net. I don't know how they possibly survive. Um, yeah, it's really unfathomable. There is a big divide between the Sudanese and the Chadians too. Just even in language, Sudanese they speak Arabic. Chad is a French colony, so they speak French, and that has also been one of the holdups as to why there are no schools at these camps too. I mean, there are a little bit of ad hoc Islamic schools, or some of the local leaders, trying to help people with get through some exams and things, but they're not allowed to set up schools because the Chad government has basically said that you have to abide by the Chadian curriculum, which of course the Sudanese can't do that because it's not in their language, first of all, let alone anything else, other discrepancies. So that is another big problem. So you have all these children with getting no education, and very little prospects even, if they were to get out of the refugee camp without education, it's very hard to progress to anything else in life. And that really broke my heart when I talked to, especially some of the young ones. I met a beautiful girl named Samia. She was 22. She spoke beautiful English that she taught herself just from watching American movies. And was very articulate and is writing a book about the situation. Um, but she was a university student who wanted to go on to do many things, and now, her life is rendered to pretty much nothing, but sort of trying to get by and volunteering at the clinic, um, and it breaks my heart because I don't know what I can do, and I want to look into to what I can do, to help individual cases like Sama's, but she's one of many, and even for ones that are younger than her that are, not even getting the chance to learn to read and write. It's just, yeah, it's heartbreaking because how are you going to end that cycle of poverty when these basic needs are not even being met, and I mean in this, fundamentally the nutrition, everyone you will talk to is unable to eat, is hungry. There are people that I talked to. There was one young woman who she was shot and she lost her arm, and she was telling me about her family hadn't eaten for 3 days. So it's such it's a hard thing to kind of wrap my head around how this is happening and continues to happen. Um, there is the presence of some NGOs like Save the Children and UNHCR and things, but I mean they're very limited into what they can do. And again, even with um, places like MSF or Save the Children, there is that divide because they're primarily French and the Sudanese are Arabic speakers. So there is a language barrier and also just a confidence or a safety barrier there. So a lot of them will turn to the clinic, the For You initiative, just because it is run by fellow Sudanese. But it is just, yeah, a harrowing situation sort of everywhere you turn. I think the one saving grace that I was able to come away with was the sense of community. So that was sort of the nicest thing that you could see, is at least the women who have and continue to deal with such high levels of trauma, um, at least they have each other. There is that sense of community of being around people who can relate to what you were going through, and hopefully feel a little bit less isolated. Although that doesn't necessarily make the situation better, but it was the one silver lining that I left with, was that the resiliency in just in having each other and having community and the support. And there are some women and some men, I should say, social workers that have set up sort of ad hoc trauma clinics, that try to do their best to help people that are suffering. And but again, the resources are very limited. And there was one little beautiful little place where women would make and knit and sort of make little trinkets and things, and that was sort of part of their trauma healing. But the overall sense is that there isn't sort of a great deal for them. There isn't any sort of programs. There isn't really medical care. And there are many severe cases where women are, and men too, I should say, are really having these very frightening psychotic breaks, and people that have just stopped speaking. And it's just hard to foresee that they're going to sort of get any help for what happened to them. And we're talking about traumas of having your entire family killed, having them killed in front of you, having, for the women, a lot of them have been raped very brutally. And that's really, in many ways, a death sentence, because the Sudanese are a very conservative Islamic culture. And once that sort of happens to you, your prospects of being married, pretty much go to nothing. And it is very much a death sentence. And I hope that some of those stigmas will start to change. Uh, but right now, it's just it's hard. It's hard for women to kind of be able to see the rest of their lives.
Hmm. So that's about as bleak an assessment as I've heard from you for a very long time in terms of what's going on the ground. I have so many questions. Um, I don't even know where to begin. I mean, the first obvious question is, do you think there is enough international aid showing up for these people at this time? And should there be more, and where should it be coming from?
Yeah, I mean, of course there's not. And, when people are going days and days without eating, that's a telltale sign that they're certainly not getting help. And I think even with the UN and a lot of programs, their funds, for Sudanese are very very poorly funded. I guess, they're lucky to meet maybe 20-30% of their goals for those areas. So the other thing is the rationing that has had to step up, because there's such limited amounts of food and things that can be, and those portions are getting smaller and smaller, and sort of the handouts they get each month, whether that's oil, sugar, flour, things like that, they're becoming sort of less and less. And we could argue, a separate day about the failings of the UN, which there are many. But the bleak assessment right now is that the aid just isn't there. The awareness isn't there. I think when there's awareness, people are wanting to donate. People, you look at, when the Ukraine war started, because there was such a media intensity, there were donations left, right, and center for many things, because people felt very compelled to do their part. But in this case, it just hasn't been, there hasn't been the media attention, and therefore, the aid doesn't come. So the awareness isn't there. And maybe even if the awareness was there, is the care there? I don't know. Um, and this is an uncomfortable war. The uncomfortable reality of it is that it's a very racially motivated war. It is two Islamic, cultures. This isn't a war over religion. This is basically Arabs that are slaughtering the Black Africans, and that is the reality of what is happening there. These Arab militias are largely funded by partners to the United States, such as the United Arab Emirates and to a lesser degree Libya. And we continue to consider the UAE this great partner. Meanwhile, they're funding a genocide against Black people, and that really it's failed to generate traction, I think, in the US, where race is a very sort of hot button, very important topic, but yet Darfur just hasn't seemed to sort of generate much interest. And when the war initially happened, sort of 2003, 2004, there were a lot of celebrity voices involved, from George Clooney, and Angelina Jolie, who I give credit for. She actually recently went to the same camp, I think just a couple of weeks before I was there, and made a quick kind of in and out, but still showed her commitment. But the voices, of Hollywood and big celebrities, they're no longer there anymore. There is obviously a lot of conflict going on in the world, and the Middle East has really been the focal point of that for more than the last year. But it's just important to not forget that's not the only place at war. And honestly, what I'm hearing in Darfur is some of the worst crimes against humanity that I I've ever heard. Um, and
Yeah,
and I
well,
think in many cases, when I interview victims in war, they'll often say to me, the world knows what's happening and it's silent. And I hear that pretty much in every war I've covered. And often that's not the case, whether that be when I was covering Syria, or maybe during ISIS in Iraq, or Ukraine or other places. And I know it can feel that way for victims, but often that isn't the case, that the wars are very much front and center, and people know what's happening. But when people would say that to me, when Sudanese would say that to me, I really had to agree with them, because um, yeah, there's just this
yeah,
sort of
no, you're right.
divide. Yeah.
Yeah, African wars in Africa are, it's just hard for many people in other parts of the world to fathom the dynamics of it, and particularly the prejudice laden, absolute, it's okay to kill everybody in sight aspect of what can go on there. And well, I mean, first of all, these people are actually lucky to be alive. Um, because the people that are trying to kill them are, yeah, they are pretty brutal. They would not mind at all if the sun came up tomorrow and none of them existed. Um,
I mean, it's also very rich land, which is why a lot of these militias want to take over these parts of
yeah,
Darfur. There's a lot of gold, which obviously benefits, certain Gulf countries, and a lot of other natural resources. So that is sort of a driver. And um, I mean, the Janjaweed or the RSF themselves, they post these videos bragging about their slaughter. I have many of them, and I get sent many of them, and where they're mass execution, or they are burying people alive, if you can imagine. Um, they're also not, and I think one of the biggest traumas is everyone who will tell me about their father or their son who was shot and killed, is that the Janjaweed prohibited them from burying the dead. So that's left a huge hole and a huge gap for their grieving, because many feel that they don't have closure, and that they had to flee and leave behind the dead. And if in cases where people were able to bury the dead, the RSF would then come and dig up the bodies. So it was just it's completely inhumane, um, no dignity, even for the dead. And just the sort of inhumanity of it, I think, is striking, and in how they've managed to completely dehumanize an entire population, in every way,
is
shape, or
that is that one
form.
of those is that one of those strange aspects of African continent warfare where uh, making it so that even after people are dead, you're still making them suffer. essentially, as
Yeah,
long as you
absolutely.
possibly.
And they're wanting just to drive people from their homes and make sure they never come back. Um, they want
Yeah.
them to, they want that trauma to drive them away and never return so that they can keep that land.
Yeah. So no prospects that there are any outside levers that are going to get these people to stop doing what they're doing. It sounds like, but basically from what you said, it doesn't sound like there's anybody actually trying to force these people to stop what they're doing at this point in time.
There isn't, and I can only hope, that someone in the incoming administration may put it on their radar. And I mean, the key to not only just sort of providing humanitarian aid, but the key to enable people to go back and to resume their lives is to stop the influx of weapons, to stop, the arming these brutal militias. And that's where the US and other international partners could have some leverage, and so far have not engaged that. And that is very frustrating. A lot of the statements that I see coming out of the State Department sort of acknowledge the fighting, but there tends to be this very this desire to make it a moral equivalent of fighting on both sides and condemning the violence on both sides, which is frustrating because look, I'm sure there's violence on both sides. You certainly have, African tribes people trying to fight back, but it's a very skewed war. And when you're trying to basically say that each side is committing these atrocities evenly, you're doing a really big disservice to the victims and the people that are suffering because this is not an even war.
Yeah, and I'm not buying that. I think if that's the way that the United States State Department is trying to play it, that's bullshit. Is I mean, straight up. I mean, sorry to use the word, but uh there's people inside the State Department that know better. They will understand the dynamics of what is going on the ground. This sounds like a very one-sided war from the point of view of who's willing to kill whom and who's running away. Um, and they basically a destroyed what was a recovering. I mean, it's like all African nations and societies, they're basically recovering from the last time somebody tried to kill everybody at sight, and they were kind of doing okay, starting to get better, and then they come in and do this to them again. I don't buy it that it's a bilateral war. Do you?
No, it's not a bilateral war. It's not there's nothing even about it. And I just think that trying to create a moral equivalent is damaging. And I would like to see a little bit more I'd like to see a little bit more of that pronounced by the US government, and also um, examining the relationship with people who are arming these militias. They aren't building their own weapons. They're certainly coming from outside, and they're paying off poor governments in the region to be able to funnel that through as well. So there are a lot of players that are complicit in this. And I think that's where the US could use leverage, and could, take a stand, and at the end of the day, that's to stop the violence. That is the only way to start to bring some semblance of peace and allow communities to heal, to be able to go home. Um, it's incredibly traumatizing. But like everywhere that I think I visited, you are always reminded of yeah, the resilience of people, how I always say how the ordinary become very extraordinary. You see that just in everybody's willingness to somehow find that lining to keep going, to continue caring for their children, to continue doing whatever they can to provide. And mind you, Sudanese women are incredibly hardworking. They're not. It's not the sort of. It's not like Afghanistan in the sense that the Taliban wants these women in the home taking care of the family and sort of never surfacing. The women are doing the large portion of the hard labor. They typically have a baby strapped to their back. It's boiling hot. They've got some sort of heavy thing balanced on their head. They're collecting water. They're out there chopping wood in 100-degree heat. Um, they work from dusk till dawn, and then I can't imagine getting much of a peaceful sleep at night just because of the conditions. So it's incredibly it's just an incredibly challenging life, but at the same time, I'm always in awe of that human spirit and that willingness to go on, and how these mothers raise their many children with very little resources. And it
Yeah.
certainly makes me
Wow.
kind of look at, when I see on Instagram or on social media, and there are, mothers that are complaining about the sleeplessness with their one child or two children or whatever it is, and all these different challenges. And I'm certainly not, immune to that either. But I really think, how easy we have it
Oh yeah, yeah, no,
compared
no.
to what their
Anybody,
lives are like.
anybody in that zone you visited could easily say, "Hold my beer." Look at what I got to put
Yeah.
up with.
And I
Yeah.
want, I don't want to diminish anything that other people are going through, because everybody has challenges regardless of where you are. But I really want people to understand what these Sudanese, these Darfurian women are capable of doing and enduring. And they don't complain. They're not going to complain to you. Um, and just to take a step back and pause and remember how really lucky that we are, here in the United States or whatever other country it might be, where our lives, have their challenges, but they're certainly not like that. It certainly gives me great pause as well, um, just to be grateful for what I have. And looking, there was one little baby, Ratal. She was so cute, although she was very scared of me. But she was about the same age as Raven, and I just noticed, just in little things like and head circumference, how much smaller her head would be to Raven's. And that broke my heart, because that
They just don't develop.
is a key sign of a lack of nutrients and a lack of development. Um and that's particularly common, and it just broke my heart, because it's such
Yeah,
a hard start in life. But one thing the children will always have is that they are very loved.
yeah. Well, wow. Well, that is what I can't remember the last time I had such a depressing report for you. I think probably the last time I had talked to you about something so depressing was when you went up to Sinjar Mountain and were, like reporting on just how bad things were over there during the middle of ISIS. But yeah, our the timer on this thing is drawing to a close. But geez, 2 weeks in Africa and seeing firsthand just how bad things are. Um, I personally hope that the stuff that you're doing and the stuff that other people are doing to try to bring attention to the fact that there isn't a severe imbalance in the attention on this that needs to be put into place to bring that part of the world out of genocide, which
Yeah.
it does from time to time, and back into something where these people stand a chance is that this will do some good as it has done in the past because of the stuff that you do. So thanks so much, Holly. I mean, it was a depressing report, but I think a very important one.
Yeah, but as I said, it's, I'm not going to sugarcoat things. I'm going to say it as it is. And I think as global citizens, it's important to be aware of the world around us and the people around us. And empathy is not it's not a limited resource. It's something that we can share. And there's also just a huge amount of guilt too when you leave a place and have the option to leave a place. And when you speak to people and they share your stories with them in the hope that something will change overnight. And it's a very hard for me to sort of try to balance those expectations and saying that um, it's not going to change overnight. But, awareness is the beginning. And I have to also reckon with the notion of my role as a journalist is to build that awareness. And I can't I'm limited to what I can do beyond that. As much as I regretted that I, couldn't have taken a much more cash with me, I took a little bit, but just cash to help people get through the next month or so of their lives. But people can, if you want to help. As I said, I was there with Sudan Sunrise. Please Google Sudan Sunrise and check them out. It's a great organization run by my good friend Tom, who's been doing this work in this particular region now for over 2 decades. He is the real deal. He doesn't take a paycheck. Everything goes back into helping people in the ground in the region. And also thank you to Frontsight Media who sponsored my trip, and there will be a video coming out with the interviews and things. So I'll be sure to share that on my Substack and let you all know when that is coming out as well. And thank you to you, Dennis, for always being a support when I'm traveling.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's been a while since we did the please do daily check-ins to yeah, the keep alives
Yeah.
or the I'm still alive things. Oh God, sending you into a war zone always worries me, but here you are, you're back. Thank you so much, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Dennis.